In this video, we'll set up a backend Node.js server. I'm starting with an empty directory in VS Code. Then I'm going to create a directory named server that holds all of our backend code. Now, the version of Node.js that you use depends on whatever's installed on your system right now. But for this course, I recommend installing Node.js version 10. You can easily do that with Node Version Manager. There's a package for Linux and Mac, and a separate one for Windows. Once you have it installed, you can run the nvm install version 10 command, and this will ensure that you're working with the Node.js version that will ultimately deploy to production at the end of the course. nvm will also install Node Package Manager, or npm. We can set up a basic Node project by opening the command line and then running npm init with the y flag to use the default settings. That should create a package JSON that allows us to install external dependencies into this project. Now, I'd recommend using the dependencies that are listed below in the video description, because if you use later versions, there could be breaking changes that affect the code in this course. But that's just a recommendation, and you're welcome to use the latest versions, and if you notice any breaking changes, please let me know. You'll notice a variety of dependencies in here, and I'll explain these as they come up in the course. Go ahead and save the file, and then run npm install to install everything. The one you want to be aware of right now is TypeScript. It's used in this course because it provides inline documentation for the Stripe API and makes your code much more robust by making it difficult for you to shoot yourself in the foot by passing the wrong information to the Stripe API. To set up TypeScript, we'll add a tsconfig.json file and a tslint.json file to this project. I'd recommend simply copying and pasting the values for these files from the main source code. The tslint is just for code formatting, but the tsconfig file determines how your code is actually compiled to raw JavaScript. If you've never used TypeScript before, there's a couple of things you'll want to know about this tsconfig file. The first one is that it looks in our source directory and grabs all of our source ts files and then compiles them to the out directory, which is named lib. To see this in action, go ahead and create a source directory and then add a file named index.ts. For now, we can just add some simple JavaScript inside this file. At this point, we need a way to transpile our TypeScript code to JavaScript code. Open up your package JSON again and add a script for build and a script for serve. We can build or compile our code using the tsc command, or TypeScript compiler. If we run npm run build from the command line, you can see that it creates a lib directory and adds our TypeScript code there as raw JavaScript. You should never modify any of the code in the lib directory because it will always be overridden by TypeScript. Now we can run our code in Node.js by adding a start script. The start script will run node lib/index.js to run this file with Node. So those two scripts will build your code and run your code. But in development, you're often making code changes very frequently, and you'll want TypeScript to automatically recompile that code and Node to rerun the latest code. So in order to facilitate that, I added two packages to this project in development called Concurrently and NodeMon. Concurrently simply runs two processes at the same time. NodeMon will monitor a JS file and then rerun it anytime its source changes. Now, with that being said, we can create a dev script that will concurrently run TypeScript and use the W flag to watch the changes, and at the same time run NodeMon with our lib index.js file. The end result here is essentially hot reloading for our server code. So anytime we make changes to a TypeScript file, they'll automatically be reflected in the server that's running in the background. As you go through this course developing your own code, I'd recommend using this dev script so that your changes are always reflected in whatever API calls you're making. Now let's go ahead and switch gears into another important concern, environment variables. In Node.js, we can use a package called .env to manage environment variables on our system. Go ahead and create a .env file in your server directory. And you'll also want to make sure this file is added to your gitignore because you don't want to expose it in a public repo because it could contain sensitive information. In fact, let's go ahead and set an environment variable in this file called stripe secret. Make it equal to your stripe secret testing key from the dashboard. Now, the purpose of .env is to load these values into your server at runtime. Go into the index.ts file, then import config from .env. When the node environment does not equal production, we want to load the values from this .env file. In production, we'll use whatever environment variables are available in our Docker container or server, which I explain in detail in the deployment section. Now that we have our environment variables, we can import the Stripe SDK. We can then instantiate the Stripe client using this API key, which allows us to easily make API calls from our Node.js code. We can also specify an API version, and you'll want to make sure to use the same API version that I'm using in this video. And now our backend is ready to start interacting with Stripe. In the next video, we'll get going with Express.js by setting up our first RESTful endpoint.